Welcome to this presentation on the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget. To begin painting the picture of where the state is financially today, it's important to go back to July of last year.
The bill of the governor is overridden, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
And with that, and not a vote to spare, 71 Illinois representatives pass a budget.
That's quickly followed by hugs of relief perhaps, ending a 2-year plus drought in the state without a spending plan.
With a set of veto overrides, the Illinois General Assembly enacted a tax and budget package. The $36 billion package raised the individual income tax rate to 4.95%, just short of the 5% level under the temporary increase, and raised the corporate rate to 7%. It was touted as having a $356 million surplus that could be applied to the state's bill backlog. However, the legislature did make approximately $3 billion in cuts, including a 10% cut to higher education and a 10% reduction in general revenue fund transfers to the local government distributive fund and public transit funds. Shortly after its passage, the question became, is the budget balanced? And the Governor's Office of Management and Budget issued an emphatic no. In October, GOMB issued a memo in which it stated it believed the budget was out of balance by $1.7 billion. It attributed that to the fact that it said revenue estimates were too high, enacted pension reforms would not materialize in the current fiscal year, that while the budget authorized the issuance of $6 billion worth of bonds to help pay down the bill backlog, it did not include the debt service for the current fiscal year on those bonds, and there were one-time transfers. GOMB enacted $150 million in budget cuts that included reducing spending on many state programs to FY17 or below levels, taking a 5% reduction in other programs, and maintaining a 6-month redetermination process for child care eligibility. Within the Department of Human Services, cuts included $4 million for Redeploy Illinois, $3.4 million for the Youth Employment Program, and nearly $7 million for Teen Reach. At one point, the state's bill backlog totaled nearly $16.7 billion. With the borrowing of $6 billion and matching federal funds, the state was able to whittle the bill backlog down by $8.7 billion. However, in presenting the fiscal year 19 budget, the administration is also asking for a $1.3 billion supplemental for the current fiscal year, mostly for prior year liabilities. And the fiscal year 18 budget includes net revenue of $240 million from the sale of the James R. Thompson Center in Chicago, which it does not appear will occur prior to the end of the fiscal year. According to the financial statements in the governor's proposed budget, taking into account the estimated bill backlog, FY18 costs that will be billed in FY19, and other items, the estimated accounts payable at the end of fiscal year 18 will total $9.5 billion. Just as with prior bills, the longer certain bills remain unpaid, the more interest those bills accrue. There are other cost considerations to take into account. In 2011, the state granted ASME employees a pay increase, but it only appropriated part of the funds necessary to meet that obligation. In 2015, when the state's contract with ASME expired, it stopped granting salary step increases to ASME employees. The Illinois Supreme Court has ruled that those employees are owed those increases and has returned the case back to the Illinois Labor Relations Board for review. Another consideration is additional education funding. Last fall, the legislature approved a new school funding formula designed to reduce funding inequities. While not part of the law, the new formula comes with the goal of putting an additional $350 million into K-12 education for each of the next 10 years. In addition, as part of the package, the legislature approved a new income tax credit for individuals and businesses making donations to designated qualified scholarship granting organizations to help pay tuition for low-income students to private schools. The credits are worth a total of $75 million annually. The budget package authorized the transfer of up to $1.2 billion from special funds to the general fund to assist with cash flow and the payment of outstanding bills. However, that came with the stipulation that the state repay those special funds within 24 months. At the end of March, the state had transferred $516 million out of special funds. In addition, it's presently estimated that the increase in pension costs from the General Revenue Fund will be $589 million. That brings us to the proposed budget for fiscal year 19. The budget has estimated revenues of $37.96 billion and estimated expenditures of $37.61 billion, leaving an estimated surplus of just over $350 million. It assumes the authorization of $600 million in interfund transfers, and it relies on a set of measures that include shifting teacher pension costs to local school districts over a 4-year period, reducing expenditures for employee and retiree health care, and reducing Medicaid rates. For fiscal year 19, that means a $262 million reduction to the teachers' retirement system. It means the state would not pick up Chicago teacher pension payment and health care expenditures that were part of the new school funding bill. It means eliminating the payment for retired teachers' health care. It means reducing health care benefits for current state employees by nearly $500 million. And it means reducing Medicaid reimbursement rates for most providers by 4%. The budget also includes capturing $240 million from the sale of the James R. Thompson Center. If the legislature does not approve the proposed cost-saving measures, and if the Thompson Center is not sold, then combined with the estimated surplus, the proposed budget could have a $1.13 billion shortfall, leaving open the possibility of further cuts to human services or payment delays to providers. Keep in mind that a certain portion of the state budget is essentially set. There's debt service, pension costs, absent any change to the pension payment ramp, statutory transfers, Medicaid payments, human service consent decrees and court orders, and group health insurance. And keep in mind that during the budget impasse for each of the 2 years, the legislature approved a full-year K-12 budget. Therefore, a certain amount of the state budget is essentially locked in, and that $1 billion will have a greater impact on those items not locked in. Many line items in the fiscal year 19 budget represent level funding from fiscal year 18, recognizing that in a number of cases, the FY18 levels are lower than FY15. Money is included for the annual increase in the new school aid formula, and early childhood education sees an increase of $10.5 million. Although, based on an agreement for a federal early childhood education block grant several years ago, many believe the amount should be $50 million. There is a decrease in child care assistance. The governor's office says it is meeting the anticipated need, but that projected number may be artificially low because of people removed from the eligibility rolls during the last several years, when eligibility went from 185% of the federal poverty level to 50% to 162% and then back up to 185% last fall. But that occurred with no outreach effort by the state indicating the restored eligibility level of 185%. A number of grant programs from supportive housing to epilepsy services are reduced between 5 and 7% in the budget, with deeper cuts for after-school youth programs, youth employment, funeral and burial expenses, and complete elimination of funding for welcoming centers. Furthermore, there are decreases in funding for addiction treatment and mental health services with the intention of moving the cost for Medicaid-eligible clients over to Healthcare and Family Services. However, as noted earlier, this is in conjunction with a proposed decrease in Medicaid reimbursement rates to most providers. The budget does not restore the prior 10% cut to higher education. Several university presidents have stated the proposal is not adequate and they won't be able to restore programs or staff cuts made during the budget impasse. Therefore, absent tuition increases, and with increasing costs for operations and a backlog of capital needs, it leaves the door open to further cuts at the universities. One additional note, while the recently approved federal budget did not make steep cuts in domestic programs, given the size of the increase in the federal deficit with last year's tax reform package, it is quite possible such cuts could be on the horizon in the next several years and impact funding for housing, child care, health care, and education. Going 2 years without a state budget, having a large backlog of bills, a pension liability of approximately $130 billion, and a current budget shortfall, it has all made credit rating agencies quite concerned about the state's finances. 2 of the major credit rating agencies have the state rated just above junk bond or non-investment grade status. If the state fails to approve a 12-month budget for fiscal year 19, it could well push the state into junk bond status, resulting in higher interest rates on any debt issuance by the state. In addition, the situation is impacting the credit rating of many municipalities around the state, as those jurisdictions need to pay higher interest rates on any bonds issued. It can translate to higher property taxes for residents of those communities. But more than the credit rating, there's the real human suffering. Let's not forget some of what occurred during the last budget impasse, when human service providers had to reduce services and cut staff. 49% of disability service providers reduced services, and 39% of adult education providers reduced services. In a report conducted by Moody's Analytics for the state, the firm offered up the assessment that in terms of geography and its workforce, Illinois is a good place to locate. But as long as there is an uncertain state financial situation, companies will think twice about locating or remaining in Illinois. So here are some policy considerations as the governor and members of the General Assembly try to find common ground on a budget. Just how long are we going to take to pay down the bill backlog? 5, 7, 10, perhaps even 15 years? Keep in mind, depending on the mix, interest may accrue on many of those bills, but also it will continue to dampen the state's credit rating. Are we going to restore funds cut from municipalities and local transit districts? If not, and if those jurisdictions continue their current levels of service, what will it mean for your property taxes or bus fare? How will we handle higher education funding going forward? To bridge the revenue gap, do we look at additional fund transfers from special funds? A pension payment ramp signed into law in 1994 was backloaded, particularly since 2007. This ramp has been on a strong upward climb. It will begin to level off, but annual contributions take up more than 20% of the General Revenue Fund's budget. The law is predicated on having the state pension systems 90% funded by 2045. Should we extend the requirement beyond 2045 and craft a new payment ramp, which might cost the state more, but could allow the state to reduce pension payments for fiscal year 19 or 20? A wild card in such scenario would be the rate of return on investments for the time period established. Should we re-examine some of the existing state tax expenditures? There has been discussion at times about changing the retailer's discount on sales tax receipts, which is designed to help retailers with compliance costs. Some argue in this computerized age the established rate is too high. In 2011, the state suspended the net operating loss for corporations. Is that something that the state should reconsider for a year or two? The important messages to continue to convey are that the lack of a 12-month state budget may well push the state into junk bond status, that it will create more uncertainty for human service providers and businesses, and in general, just create further chaos for those human service providers who, again, will have to decide about cutting programs and staff. Given the fact that we have a Republican governor and a Democratic-controlled legislature, with the House not having a veto-proof majority, getting a budget will likely take bipartisanship. And keep in mind that if one is not enacted by May 31st, it will take even more votes. If there's no agreement, it could mean further cuts to human services, junk bond status for the state, and a rapidly increasing pile of bills. With a heated gubernatorial race on the horizon, let's hope bipartisanship sticks around for a few weeks to enact a budget.